For 5 years, I carried us. Through every failed venture, every bounce check, every late night promise that this one's different. Diego always had a new idea, a pitch, a plan. And I had the money. I picked up extra shifts, canceled my gym membership, stopped replacing things that broke. I told myself it was just a rough patch, but rough patches aren't supposed to last this long, are they? I even touched my inheritance. The one my father left me. The one I once imagined using for a little house near the coast, with quiet mornings and coffee by the sea. Instead, I watched it drain into business consultants, branding experts, overpriced flights, all to keep Diego's next big thing alive. I never asked for anything in return. I believed in him. Or maybe I just didn't want to believe I'd married a sinking ship. He traveled a lot, always for something urgent. Always a city I couldn't pronounce fast enough to question. I packed his things, left sweet notes in his luggage, kissed him goodbye at the door. And I waited. For results, for gratitude, for the version of our life he kept promising would finally arrive. I thought I was being supportive. But looking back now, I was just being kept in the dark. I got used to saying no to myself. No to weekend getaways, no to new clothes, no to that cooking class I'd been eyeing for years. Every time I thought about spending on something just for me, I'd hear Diego's voice in my head, reminding me how close he was to turning things around. Just a little more time, he'd say. And so, I gave him more. Time, money, pieces of myself I didn't even realize I was giving away. He'd call me from hotel rooms, always just after some big meeting, his voice full of excitement, telling me this deal was different. I'd listen, play the part, tell him how proud I was, even when something in me started to feel hollow. That quiet tug in my chest? I ignored it. I thought it was just fatigue, but it was doubt. And it was growing, slowly, like a hairline crack in glass. There were moments, small ones, when I'd catch a strange charge on his card or hear a slip in his story, but I pushed it aside. Because once you've invested that much into someone, it's terrifying to ask yourself what it would mean if it all crumbled. I told myself I was strong, that love meant sacrifice, that he'd do the same for me if the tables were turned. But deep down, I was starting to wonder if he'd ever really see me at all. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when it would finally be our time, not just his. I'd picture us sitting on a balcony somewhere, drinks in hand, laughing about how hard it all was, but how we made it. That version of the future kept me going. I clung to it like a lifeline, because if I didn't believe things would change, I'd have to admit I was being used. And that truth was too painful to face. Sometimes I'd imagine what my friends would say if they knew just how much I was giving up, but I kept the details vague. Diego's working on something big, I'd say. It's just a matter of time. I didn't want their pity, or worse, their judgment. I needed to protect the story I'd built around us, the one where I was the loving wife, and he was the visionary who just needed a little more support. I didn't realize it then, but I was slowly disappearing. Not all at once, just little pieces at a time. A missed lunch here, a forgotten dream there. I kept pouring into him, thinking I was building our future. But really, I was funding his. And I was about to find out just how far he'd gone with it, and who he'd taken along for the ride. It started on a Wednesday night, just after dinner. I was sorting laundry, the usual pile of his button-downs and travel-wrinkled slacks, when something stiff brushed against my fingers inside his jacket pocket. At first, I thought it was a boarding pass, nothing unusual. But when I unfolded it, my hands went cold. It wasn't from any city Diego had mentioned, and it wasn't just a hotel receipt. It included a spa package, for 2. I stared at that slip of paper like it had the power to rewrite every conversation we'd ever had. And maybe it did. The name of the hotel, the suite upgrade, the romantic amenities. It all screamed intimacy. I felt like the floor under me shifted, just a little, like gravity wasn't playing fair anymore. My mouth went dry, and my brain tried to catch up, whispering excuses I didn't even believe. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was old. But the date was recent. Too recent. Right around the time he said he was meeting with a tech investor in Chicago. Only this wasn't Chicago. And unless tech meetings now came with couples massages and champagne on ice, I knew exactly what this was. My heart didn't just drop, it split. I sank onto the edge of the bed, receipt still trembling in my hand, and suddenly, the silence in our house felt deafening. I didn't cry right away. That was the strange part. I just sat there, still, quiet, watching the ceiling like maybe an answer would fall from it. But instead, something inside me clicked. A slow, steady shift from heartbreak to something colder, focused. I opened my laptop. I pulled out old receipts, logged into our bank accounts, and for the first time in years, I looked at his business trips with clear eyes. The puzzle came together too easily. Flights to cities he never told me about, charges at restaurants I'd never been to, designer gifts I never received. Each line item felt like a slap, and yet it was the repetition that hit hardest. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was a pattern, a life he'd built parallel to mine. While I was budgeting groceries, he was buying room service for someone else. I started cross-checking dates, matching them to the stories he told. I pulled up credit card statements, hotel reservations, even rideshare receipts. I felt like I was watching a movie I didn't know I was in, and the lead actress had no idea her co-star was faking every scene. The evidence didn't scream. It whispered. Cold. Methodical. Calculated. And it told me the one truth I could no longer ignore. I'd been financing his affair, one transaction at a time. What hurt the most wasn't just that he lied, it was how easily he did it. The way he'd come home, kiss me on the cheek, toss his suitcase aside like he'd been working non-stop. He'd thank me for holding everything down while he chased his dreams. Meanwhile, the only thing he'd been chasing was her. And I couldn't help but wonder, did he laugh with her the same way he used to laugh with me? I started replaying everything in my mind. The way he'd get defensive when I asked too many questions, the phone he never left unattended, the sudden urgency of unplanned meetings. The signs were all there, but I was too loyal, too in love, to see them. Or maybe I saw them and just didn't want to believe what they meant. Because believing it meant I'd wasted years. And more than that, it meant I didn't know the man I married at all. But now? Now I knew. I had the receipts. Literally. I had the dates, the locations, the proof. And as I sat there, surrounded by a storm of printed lies, something in me began to harden. The woman who had spent years bending, giving, sacrificing, she was still in there. But she wasn't going to bend anymore. Not for him, not ever again. I didn't scream, I didn't throw things, I didn't even confront him, not right away. Instead, I smiled. I greeted him at the door like I always did, warm and calm, as if I hadn't just uncovered the collapse of our marriage hidden inside a laundry pocket. He kissed my forehead. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and asked about his trip. He gave me the same tired story, and I nodded like I believed it. But inside, I was burning. Not just with anger, with clarity. Every gesture he made, every word he said, felt like part of a play I'd already seen the ending to. And now, I wasn't just an audience member. I was the writer. So I started taking notes, literally. I saved messages, bank statements, every reservation and receipt. I took screenshots at midnight, double-checked dates while he snored beside me. I began preparing in silence. Not out of fear, out of strategy. I knew if I let him see even one crack in the surface, he'd twist it, play the victim, blame stress, maybe even me. So I kept smiling. I made his coffee in the morning, laughed at his bad jokes, handed him money for an urgent flight. But every gesture was a thread I was about to cut. Because while he thought he was still playing me, I was rewriting the entire script. I started moving differently. Subtle things, like checking our joint accounts daily, or making quiet calls from my car instead of the kitchen. I found a lawyer, someone discreet, someone who didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer out loud. She listened, took notes, and helped me understand just how much I had given, and how much I still stood to lose if I didn't act smart. It was the first time in years I felt like I was thinking for myself. Every day after that, I took a little more back. I requested full copies of our mortgage records. I traced car titles, insurance documents, all the assets I had helped pay for but that he had somehow claimed as his own. I made digital folders, backed up everything on a hidden drive. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was awake. And I wanted my power back, piece by piece, starting with the paper trail he thought I'd never notice. And still, I smiled. I told him to take care of himself on his next trip. I packed his toiletries in a neat little bag and slipped in a folded 20, like the fool he thought I still was. But every time I looked at him now, I didn't see a husband. I saw a taker, a man who mistook kindness for weakness and patience for ignorance. And I knew, when I finally made my move, he'd never see it coming. At night, I'd lie beside him, pretending to drift off while my mind raced through timelines and legal terms. I started memorizing his travel patterns, how long he was gone, where he said he'd be, and then I'd cross-check it with what I knew. I became fluent in the language of lies, the half-smiles, the vague answers, the sudden phone calls he'd take outside, and I played my part so well, he never noticed I'd stopped listening. Sometimes I'd look at him and try to remember who I thought he was. The man I fell in love with had dreams, ambition, a soft spot for stray dogs and slow jazz on Sunday mornings. But now, I couldn't tell if that man ever really existed, or if he was just a mask Diego wore to get what he wanted. That question haunted me more than the cheating. Because if I never really knew him, what exactly had I been loving all this time? Still, I didn't let myself sink into sadness. Not anymore. I had a plan now. Quiet, calculated, and just beginning to take shape. And I knew the next time he reached for his suitcase, thinking he was heading toward another lie, he'd unknowingly be stepping right into mine. When he told me about his next trip, I smiled so sweetly I surprised even myself. "Do you want me to help you pack?" I asked, and he laughed like I was still the same woman who believed his stories. I laid out his favorite shirts, rolled his socks neatly, even tucked in a little note, just like old times. Only this time that note wasn't a love letter. It was a photo. Me, holding the receipts, the texts, the hotel bookings, proof, cold, undeniable proof. He didn't see me slip it into the side pocket of his suitcase. Just like he didn't see the email I'd scheduled to send the morning after his check-in, one with attachments labeled, "For Diego only." He had no idea that while he was off chasing pleasure, I was dismantling the life he thought he controlled. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was freedom, but freedom always comes with a price, and I decided it was finally his turn to pay. The moment he pulled out of the driveway, I got to work. I called the bank and froze our joint accounts. Not a dime more would leave under my name. I contacted the title office and signed over the car, paid in full by me, into my own name. I went down the list: insurance, house deed, credit lines. Anything with my name attached was now mine alone. I wasn't erasing him. I was reclaiming me. There was something oddly peaceful about it, the silence of a home finally shifting back into my hands. I walked through each room like I was seeing it for the first time, no longer as ours, but as mine. The walls felt different, lighter, maybe because the weight I'd been carrying for years was finally starting to lift. I didn't cry. Not when I signed the documents, not when I cut the final financial tie. I just breathed, deeply, freely. The lawyer handled the divorce papers with precision. She arranged for them to be delivered directly to the hotel where Diego was staying, addressed to him and the woman. I wanted her name on the envelope. I wanted the front desk to call out their names together as they picked it up. Not out of cruelty, but because if they were bold enough to build something on my pain, they deserved to receive the truth side by side. As the courier confirmed delivery, I sat by my window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset. I imagined the moment he'd open the envelope, still basking in the lie, still thinking I was at home waiting for his return. I pictured his face when the illusion shattered, the disbelief, the panic, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of regret. But I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was already too far ahead. By the time Diego realized what had happened, it was already done. He called, of course, 8 times in a row. I didn't answer. Not because I was trying to hurt him, but because I didn't owe him any more of my time, my breath, or my explanations. Let him sit in the luxury suite I unknowingly paid for, reading every detail of the life he lost. Let him explain to her why the cards no longer worked and why the cars weren't his anymore. I used to dream of hearing him beg. Some dramatic apology, some sweeping admission. But when the moment came, I didn't need it. That's the thing about betrayal. Once you truly see someone for who they are, there's no going back. I didn't want him groveling at my feet. I just wanted him out of my way. And now he was. Not by force, not with shouting or revenge, but with receipts, documents, and the truth, all served quietly. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. I lit a candle, sat on my porch. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. He had taken so much from me, my time, my trust, my peace, but he would never take my future, because now, for the first time, it actually belonged to me. A few weeks later, I stood at the airport, boarding pass in hand. Only this time, it wasn't for someone else's dreams. It was for mine. No one was waiting on the other end, no one I needed to impress or justify my absence to. Just me, a carefully packed suitcase, and a destination I chose without asking permission. For the first time in years, I was traveling light, not just in luggage, but in spirit. I'd cut my hair the day before, nothing drastic, just enough to feel like a reset, a little shorter, a little bolder. When I looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself, not because I looked different, but because I looked free. There was a glow in my skin I hadn't seen in years. Not from makeup. From peace. From knowing I had finally stopped shrinking to make someone else feel big. As I settled into my first-class seat, a flight attendant offered me champagne. I said yes, not because I needed it, but because I could. I pulled a book from my tote bag, the one I'd been meaning to read for years, and as the plane began to rise, I closed my eyes and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer pretending. I wasn't escaping. I was arriving into myself. I thought about Diego, briefly. I wondered if he was still scrambling, trying to call banks, rewriting his version of the story for anyone who'd listen. Maybe she was gone by now. Probably. Those kinds of women usually vanish when the money dries up. And he'd be left with the reality he thought he was too clever to ever face. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I had my own life to focus on. Finally. I didn't need revenge. I had closure. Not the kind that comes with dramatic confrontations or teary apologies, but the kind you give yourself when you stop waiting for someone to make things right. I'd done that. Quietly, elegantly, with facts, not fury. I wasn't bitter. I was clear. And clarity, I was learning, is one of the most expensive forms of freedom. One I paid for in pieces, but earned completely. Somewhere over the clouds, I caught my reflection in the cabin window. Not the old version of me, the fixer, the forgiver, the woman who gave without limits. No. I saw someone new, still soft, but stronger now, wiser. A woman who could finally laugh at the absurdity of it all, who could toast to beginnings instead of mourning endings, and who knew without a doubt that her best chapters hadn't even started yet. When we landed, I didn't rush off the plane. I took my time. I let others push past, clutching their bags, glued to their phones. I stood, stretched, and stepped into a new chapter like I had nothing to prove. Because I didn't. Everything I'd been through, everything I'd uncovered, it had brought me here. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing anything. I was simply choosing myself. I spent the first evening walking barefoot along the beach, the sky soft with dusk, the air thick with salt and promise. I let the ocean pull at my ankles as I thought about everything I once feared losing, and how none of it mattered now. What I had, finally, was peace. No lies, no weight, no one needing me to save them while I quietly drowned. Just my breath, my body, my freedom. He used my love to pay for her vacations. That's what hurt the most. Not just the betrayal, but the waste of something so pure. But I'm done carrying his debts. I sent him the bill, in every way that mattered. And now I'm the one boarding planes, not to run away, but to return to myself, and this time I'm traveling light.